counselor and writer, very active on social media as well. Thank you so much for sparing your time, Smita, to do this. May I request you to take over the proceedings from here?
It's always a pleasure to talk to people, especially at this point of time when we're going through such strange circumstances. And as you mentioned, we have a stellar panel. I will start by introducing today all of our panelists, and each one of them will speak for 5 minutes. And then we will have a series of Q&As. First, I will ask them a few questions, and then we will open out the floor to the audience. Usually on gender panels, we end up having an all-women panel. So I'm very excited to have a gentleman here, Rateesh Krishnan. So I will start by introducing him. Rateesh Krishnan believes in making a difference to make a living. His purpose, he says, is to unlock the human potential of individuals. Rateesh, fondly known as RATS, is the head of experiments and new ventures of SBI Edge, a for-profit entity that nurtures a new breed of disruptive ventures through experiments which are built to benefit from exponential thinking and emerging technologies. RATS tells us that 4 adjectives that people associate with him are energy, enthusiasm, execution, and edge. He serves as a people scientist, possibilist, raconteur, dream catcher, idea therapist, and culture. Wow. Next, we have Anuradha Shankar, who's a senior police officer. She was awarded the Gallantry Medal by the President of India in 2009 for busting a weapons factory run by extremists. She's known for her engagement with civil society for effective policing. She speaks on the role of Mahatma Gandhi and Kasturba in the Indian independence and social reform movement at various fora in India and abroad. Our third panelist today is Gautami. She's an actor, cancer survivor, and founder of Life Again Foundation. She's also a popular social commentator, TV host, and costume designer. The woman who wears so many hats is an engineer by training. She was introduced to movies through Guru Shishyan, which starred Rajnikant. And our final panelist for today is the founder and CEO of Periferry, Neelam. Neelam is a 25-year-old social entrepreneur. So one of the first things you notice about her is how young she is. Neelam is deeply passion-driven to build an inclusive society. She worked for 2 years with Goldman Sachs, but then she decided to follow her passion and founded Periferry in May 2017. Neelam is also a TEDx speaker and advocate for LGBTQI rights and works for their inclusion in educational institutions and workplace. A little about Periferry. It is a social enterprise committed to creating a truly inclusive world. They provide employment, education, and opportunities to the transgender community. And till date, they have created jobs in corporate workplace for over 140 trans people and have sensitized over 25,000 employees. So this is the power lineup that we have for today, ladies and gentlemen. And our topic, as you know, is the impact of COVID on gender and transgenders. Just to set the framework for the discussion, I was reading a report by UN Women the other day. And the report says that women face a disproportionate disadvantage due to situations like COVID. And why is that so? Women across the world tend to earn less, they save less, they hold less secure jobs, they are more likely to be employed in the informal sector, they have less access to social protections, and many of them happen to be single parents. So just to give you a perspective of the scale that we're talking about 740 million women across the world work in the informal economy. 65% of women have formal savings as opposed to 72% male, so there is a gap there. The gender gap also on average is about 16%, but it can extend to up to 35%. So that is just to give you a glimpse of the economic disparity. Then there's the health aspect. Did the audience know that about 70% of the health force across the world tend to be women? They work as nurses, midwives, community health workers. They also work as affiliates, laundry, cleaning staff, catering staff. And as you can tell, these are people who are the front line of the COVID war. Also, COVID has meant that There is less access to maternal care. There is less access to women who are facing teenage pregnancy. So this is just another aspect. The third aspect is the social impact. You may have been reading about gender violence that is on rise. You're reading about the struggles of women who don't have access to childcare and therefore can't go back to work. I don't want to take up any more of this time because we have experts on the panel. I would like to hand over first to Rateesh to share his views on this issue for about 5 minutes and then move on to the next speaker. Rateesh, over to you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege to actually talk today. Some of my opening remarks match with what you've just said right now. But I'd like to point something out here that I think the post-COVID response to so-called the disproportionate impact that it will definitely have and it's having right now on women will just be magnified because whether we realize it or not, I think the last 100 years of how the world has actually been running, the whole world globalization supertanker has come to a halt, whether we like it or not. And it actually used the abundance of resources, and it had a more patriarchal approach to leadership. And most often than not, when you combine abundance with a patriarchy approach, what it leads to is power. But over the last decade, I don't think most of us have spent time noticing it, that there is a whole focus on planet Earth. There's a whole focus on marginalized communities. There's a whole focus on being responsible, responsive, and most importantly, rigor with some rejuvenation. And that's a matriarchal style of leadership, and that's very nurturing. And we are actually talking about coexistence, and we are talking about 1 gram of coronavirus actually putting the entire humanity to its knees and questioning everything, right from survival to even a metaphysical existence. So I think what we are going to look at is definitely the matriarchal style of leadership, and most importantly, why women and empowerment of marginalized communities is going to be our major recovery rather than even reform as a post-COVID world response.
Okay, that's an interesting take. Matriarchal system of leadership as opposed to the current patriarchal system is what you think is going to be the natural outcome of this?
Absolutely. Because if you combine matriarchy with abundance, you only lead to sharing. It doesn't lead to power.
Wow, okay, that's food for thought indeed. Next to hear the views, I would like to call on Gautami, please. Gautami, would you share your thoughts on this, please?
Hi, everyone. I'm really glad that this conference is taking place and this conversation is happening because, and I know that more thoughts that are going to give us a wider perspective on this issue are going to come forward. But on the one hand, jumping right in, on the one hand, you have the fact that the women as well as transgender communities are actually historically disenfranchised. They have been separated from certain sections of society, from benefits, pay, social standing, security. That it could be social, it could be financial, it could be in so many other ways. And also, especially, what I heard just now, and I will agree with that in another way, as in, when you look at the numbers and see that women form the backbone of social and economical structures throughout the world, either organized or unorganized areas, it makes sense for companies, communities, and even countries to invest into empowering women and giving them that place from which they can, function. Very strange, that's not they. We can function at our optimum level, because that makes the greatest sense to getting the economy and the world back on track in terms of productivity, in terms of contribution towards a task, towards the greater good, towards financial progress, social inclusion, social empowerment of all kinds of ways, it is imperative, as we just heard, that the maternal, the matriarchal systems of social governance and other kinds of governance of the world around us have to be brought center stage. And I think this is just one other thing. And I really appreciate the fact that we have included within this topic discussion about the transgender community as well, because they're really they're not distinct at any stage, and especially more so now, because a lot of the challenges that are faced are common. And when an identification by oneself or to belong to a gender, if a transgender, trans woman says that I am a woman, many of the issues that they face in many ways are very similar. And again, coming down to the fact that whatever gender one identifies with and however one arrives at that identification and that orientation in life, the fact remains that one is a productive member of the society, and that must be encouraged in order to take society forward in a progressive manner. So whichever way you look at it, it just makes really, really good sense financially and otherwise to take women and transgender women forward.
You've actually made a very valid point that a lot of the challenges that women face, the transgender community faces too, and perhaps those challenges are compounded because of stigma, and also perhaps because this community in many ways is almost invisible. Society doesn't even often acknowledge their whole existence. So that's, yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. You wanted.
Yeah, I like what you said over there, because it throws up a very interesting point of saying that society does not acknowledge them, and also about the stigma. Now, I agree, stigma is still going as strong as it ever was, but in terms of the visibility, I am very much encouraged, and I feel very good about the fact that there is a lot of presence of transgender people, trans men, trans women in mainstream societies coming forward, either quietly making a statement and living their lives, in the way that they have chosen, or becoming activists, holding jobs which are, conventionally of one gender or the other, and making a positive impact, and thereby proving a point that we are all human beings at the end of the day, and gender it's just one aspect of our existence.
Correct. And
so that way, I think that the story has to be taken forward.
Yeah, we're taking baby steps, but yes, the movement is forward and it's positive. Now I'd like to bring in Anuradha Shankar for her views, please. Anuradha?
Yes. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Anuradha.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you and we can see you.
Yeah, okay. Hello, everyone. And thank you for including me in this very interesting panel, which has such a variety of people. And of all the variety, the most strange varieties of a police person in this panel. My son was telling me a little while ago that today is the day against discrimination against LGBTQI. It's some international day. I do not know whether it's a coincidence or whether you planned it that way, but it's a good day to talk about them. Today, I was just thinking about this gendered approach, and then including transgenders in that. The gendered approach to administration is completely absent in India, at least in our country. I can tell you that as an insider. Except for Kerala, nobody has really factored in transgenders in the legal purview or in the administrative legal paradigm. They haven't included the transgenders. I will talk about both separately because I personally feel that the challenges are very different. As you just said, Smita, that they are invisible, and this invisibilization, even if there are sporadic, there is a sub-inspector somewhere or a lawyer somewhere or somebody somewhere, it is like the 19th century women who were there somewhere, and you couldn't just say that because there was some Dr. Ramabai or some Savitri Bai Phule, you would say that women are taking center space. They did not take center space until the national movement of freedom gained ground, and women came out in thousands and lakhs to fill the jails in the non-cooperation movement led by Mahatma Gandhi. But before that, we had sporadic appearance of women. So transgender appearances are sporadic, so they are still invisible. There is also a very basic structural administrative problem in that they do not have an identity. In the sense, ask them, and those people who are working with them will know very well, as the police knows, that they have no identity papers. The biggest challenge in these COVID-19 times is that women have an Aadhaar card in their own name, with their father's name or their husband's name or their mother's name, but a transgender person, 90% of times, the people who we call the Hijra community, they do not even know who their parents are many times. So they do not have a proper Aadhaar card, and we do not have a system which will give them a proper Indian identity. So they have no ration cards. So what has happened in these COVID times is that whereas women are of course very pressured, and you're right in saying that 70% of healthcare workers are women and 100% of women are care workers, 100%. Because if they're not in the healthcare sector or in the police sector, they are in the home sector. And the home sector woman is also a caregiver. She has the primacy of caring. So 100% women are caregivers, and they have this problem there that their work is not recognized enough, but they have an identity. They are there, they are people, they are persons. Here are people who are not persons for us. And these people who are not persons for us do not have an identity. And because of that, recently one transgender died in Indore, in Madhya Pradesh, of the coronavirus infection. Maybe there are more infected. We do not know, because the testing is now gearing up slowly. It isn't as much as it should be. But what the problem is that in giving them relief, in giving them ration cards, they do not have ration cards. In giving them rations, if they go to a PDS shop, they do not have ration cards. What is their identity? Which family do they have? Now you give ration cards to families. What family does the transgender have? So these are very structural problems which we have, which we need to address. And as I told you, there's only one state in India, Kerala, which has addressed it. Even my state hasn't addressed it. And there are movements everywhere. And I would request activists to look at this, that in this country where everybody needs a paper to get a little bit of rice, you need to get them papers. And somebody should start this movement and get them identity papers, get them ration cards, so that they can be, because in this, right now, we have a huge a collection of Indian citizens, the civil society, which has risen up beyond its capacity to help out other citizens. And I can see that the state is not able to help out people who are marginalized, because the state can't reach them, because they need to reach the state. They need that bridge of relating to the state, having some papers which belong to the state, and transgenders don't have them. Gotcha. So there is this problem. About women, I want to flag one issue as a police officer, that many women who have suffered domestic violence are now locked in with their tormentors. Yes. And that is a very big challenge. And we have, unfortunately, we have been getting, complaints about them from here, from Tamil Nadu to Delhi, everywhere, women's commissions and the women helplines, dial hundreds, and you have helplines like 1050. They have been getting calls from women. But that's a very, very small number of women who are able to approach a helper. The problem there is, and now with many states opening the liquor shops, and liquor being available, and how a man becomes the emperor of the universe once he has a few pegs inside him. Yeah. And then that perpetrates more violence inside the home. So this is another aspect of this COVID-19, which I personally feel that gender violence is the second pandemic. As this is one pandemic, and the other pandemic is the domestic violence within homes. And women, the biggest challenge for women, whereas I see the identity crisis for transgenders are their biggest challenge in getting aid and help and healthcare. And for women, I feel that the domestic space has become very, very unsafe. This is what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Anuradha. You've spelled out the two distinct challenges of the transgenders and the women so beautifully. In fact, as a counselor, as a woman, when you said, these women are being locked in with their tormentors, I got goosebumps because I know how huge this problem is and what are the ramifications. I don't even want to think about what is going on inside certain families and how these women are just trapped without any recourse. And the other thing, I think for all the viewers also, it is shocking to know the transgenders so far are not only invisible in our vision, but they're literally invisible in the eyes of the law because there's no legal leeway for them. And that's something that we really need to think about. So thank you for flagging that, Anuradha. We will discuss this more, but we still have one more speaker who is Neelam, and she works with the trans community. And she's doing amazing work. For somebody so young to be so passionate is unique and rare. And I would like her to speak about her work and give her perspective. Neelam?
Hi, Smita, and very glad to see so many of you online on a Sunday evening. This is Neelam here. So yeah, firstly, today is Ida Hobbit, International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia. Basically, it's a day to create a lot of awareness about the LGBT community, highlight the kind of discrimination, highlight the kind of abuse that the community has gone through for years and the people who sacrificed their life. So it's a great day. I think coincidentally the conversation's falling on a great day. So I'm going to keep my thoughts around this, focused more on the transgender community, because I think that's the space I understand a bit more than the larger areas itself. So, when we speak about the transgender community, there's both trans women and trans men that we're talking about. So trans women, that is people who transition from male to female, and trans men, we're talking about people who transition from female to male. So I think first thing is to understand that the transgender community itself has both of these. And then there's also a lot more than this, which I wouldn't want to confuse with, say, people like gender non-conforming, people who do not want to identify to a particular woman or a man, and, identify themselves to more cultural groups like Hijra, Arvani, Koti, Tiranangai, etc. So having said that, I think the challenges of both the communities are very distinct, very different from each other. At this point in time, actually, there's a lot that the government has been doing to support the trans women community. Those in the state of Tamil Nadu who hold, say, for example, the Arvani card, or those who have their bank accounts, there's huge amounts of money that's being poured into it, and there's relief that's being made over there. But when we speak about trans men, the visibility is very, very less. And also the thought in the society that there could be there could be a woman transitioning into a man is something that we've really not understood or seen as much so far, because trans women we at least see on the streets. We know that they might be involved in traditional commercial sex work or begging or so. So just first of all, acknowledging that the trans man community exists and that they have their challenges. A lot of them don't live with their families anymore. And they also need that support is very, very crucial. And, secondly, I think what is currently happening with daily wage workers is really, really bad. But, if we just have to, for the sake of comparing the situation, I think transgender community situation is far more worse, because a huge amount of trans women only depend on begging, or some of them on commercial sex work for their livelihood. And both of those things are completely gone out right now. And even if they did go out and engage in these activities, they're highly, there's a high risk attached to it. And the health and the medical situation of the community is already highly compromised. So I think this is a very big problem, but also for the people on the line, I think it's also a great problem to solve. We see health issues that are cropping up. We're seeing that there is a pattern of creating and encouraging the community to join alternative means of livelihood and encouraging them to do other things as well. So I think while there are a lot of issues at this point that the community is facing, I think, if we can really think about what next, can this really be that tipping point from where the community can change their course and really undo what they had been doing for over decades? Maybe yes. I think there is the possibility.
Okay. The fact that people like you exist, Neelam, in this space makes me believe that clearly this is a conversation that's happening at the societal level. Maybe not enough, maybe it's only baby steps, but it is a beginning. And Anuradha had said that Kerala government is quite proactive. You're now saying the Tamil Nadu government is also taking some steps. So at least that means at state government levels, little action is being taken and we can only push it forward. Thank you for making the distinction between the transgender community itself, the the people who are male to female and the female to male, and the specific challenges that each section faces. What you have said is very interesting because they are not only marginalized, they are also vulnerable in terms of health. Because they are a community, because of their profession and because of their circumstances, their health is already compromised to start with. And then they have very limited access to healthcare. And when they do go, I'm sure there is a lot of stigma, and I'm not sure how the healthcare professionals treat them. So that is perhaps something that you would have a better idea of, but that is what I sense, that at every stage, their struggle to even get treatment is magnified. This is the outline that all our four speakers have done. Moving on to the next section of the discussion, I would like to ask the panelists, what are the few key suggestions that they can give to the government, to the society at large, so that both the women and the transgender communities can be more empowered going ahead? Who would like to go first? Gautami?
First of all, I wanted to say that what I heard from Neelam as well as Anuradha ji is very, very relevant, both in terms of the challenges that each community faces, and as well as there's already a game plan there as to what is needed next to go forward. One is definitely a legal and a state sanctioned identity for the transgender community, as I said, trans men, trans women, and which also will have to entail looking at how one defines family, how one defines, parenthood, communities, how one defines the legality, the validity of all of this. And I think this is a conversation that is already way overdue. So this is one point that definitely should be formulated and taken forward. A critical aspect again that this entire crisis period has brought up, which I have been also seeing in many places in the kind of outreach or people that I have been meeting, has been how women primarily again and again has been proven is they are the primary breadwinner of the family. Mm-hmm. Now, alcohol shops being opened up has actually thrown up one other question, which is not being spoken about, is the violence that is going to be perpetuated and increased by these, the alcohol-induced heroism of the men. More than that is the people that have been eating their heads out about employment and loss of income and wages and all of that kind of thing. Where is the money coming from for buying all of this liquor? So this is something that has been taken up by workers literally on the very, very grassroots and right on the ground in the heat and dust of this entire situation. Is again, that is the brunt of that alcohol-induced abuse that the women are taking, because whatever little can be taken, stolen, pawned, given away, exchanged, bartered, whatever, is again leaving the homes. So this is another extension of the violence, which is probably even far more extreme compared to what women have been facing on a day-to-day basis so far in a supposedly normal environment. I would say very, very clearly that hand-holding both the women as well as trans persons in education, as in empowering them towards earning a livelihood that will enable financial independence, as well as counseling in order to strengthen their own self-belief system. And then, and I think probably one of the most critical aspects is to sensitize and educate society in general about their responsibility towards our responsibility towards each other. And if one is lacking a social conscience or the sheer humaneness of having to do this, then I think it is also possible, it's entirely possible to define why it makes economic sense to include women, trans persons, and therefore every other so-called marginalized section of our society into the mainstream, because it makes a lot of business sense, economic, financial sense. So for me, it's talk to the people that need to be sensitized and to the people that need to open their minds towards all of these things being incorporated in whatever language they understand. As long as at the end of the day we achieve our goals of education, of employment, of entrepreneurship support, of mentoring, and of self-development towards women as well as trans persons.
Gautami, you made this very interesting point, because what you're essentially saying is that the violence resulting out of alcohol is not only physical, it is a larger violence, which means that you have taken away limited resources at that point available to the family and used it for alcohol.
Yes, absolutely.
That's something really to think about. And your suggestion so far, if I were to summarize it, is educate the women, educate the trans community, make them capable of earning their own livelihood, give them counseling, and sensitize the audience, the population at large, about the various issues and the challenges these communities face. Moving on, I would like to hear Rateesh, please. Rateesh, what are the kind of concrete suggestions that you think that can be done at this point of time moving ahead?
So I'm going to keep my perspective more local, because I understand that as an individual, the size that I can impact as a citizen is perhaps about 1 crore of people, and that is in a city of Chennai. And I've actually made a note of that, so I might come across as the individual looking down. I think one of the first things that we must realize and discuss the horse on the table is, I think in every house, we must actually consult with women for decision making. I think we've all taken for granted, given the fact that most of us are in lockdown and we're completing about 50 days. It becomes a prerogative for the woman to behave as the natural care.
Hi, Rateesh. I think your video's hung. Admin?
Us to have that experience and actually getting you to nurture us and protect us. I think the first step is, if all, and I'm talking as a man, if I have the so-called quote unquote right to Netflix and chill, and I think I should ask my mother, what is she doing for recreation? What does she resent doing inside this house for 50 days? What does my wife resent doing? What does my daughter want to do for recreation? How can I actually help my sister unconsciously not dictate that I should not dictate what she should be doing, but actually ask her what she must be doing, and actually pick up what's left to do, because it's the moral responsibility to run the house together. And I think we must do that. Like for instance, today my brother picked up the whole chores of cleaning the entire house. Every day we take turns to actually pick up the cooking schedule. And I think that has not just brought about a moral balance, but I think as an individual, I am able to see what my mother, my wife is actually going through on a daily basis. We even uh, uh, like they did come out with a need saying, it's been some time since we've actually visited the salon or the spa, so we actually made arrangements for that. And I think that's important, giving them the feeling that they are part of the decision making process in every house is a moral responsibility. And I think most people are waking up to it. And there is welcome change happening that people are not writing about, and I wish people start writing about that, because that leads to positive examples that people can emulate from one neighboring house to another neighboring house. So that's one. The second thing is, I think with the advent of technology and with the advent of our ability to collect data on a larger basis, our economic definitions of workforce have actually broadened, and they have actually become much more specific. And that's fantastic, because that then leads to formulations of policies and penetration of reforms. Like for instance, a cool word that people start using is the gig economy, which covers a lot of these informal workers and perhaps the invisible workforce to some extent. I think the statistics that you just provided in the beginning, like about 70% of the frontline healthcare workforce is women. I'd like to broaden that definition and say, I think a whole lot of jobs that women are doing, right from being school teachers to frontline workers to health to taking care of the elderly, I think they're going to be predominantly the so-called care economy. And I think we should put a definition around to care economy, because that seems to be a huge set of economic activities that women are naturally at the highest ratios. And most importantly, policies around that might actually help people to come into the forefront in the post-COVID world, because it's a natural progression of women to come out instead of actually trying to compete with something else.
Okay.
The third thing is, I think there's a huge health equity that is needed right now. For instance, my clarion call to the state government, or any government for that matter, is to actually include domestic violence in this context as an emergency response, so that we treat it with the same response that you may actually have a heart attack, or you actually have some kind of medical emergencies, because it's a human problem. And it's very sad that it's actually a gendered problem, but it's a human problem. The second thing that I think we should add to the emergency response system is abortion. The fact that one of the things that we didn't discuss is the fact that there is a forced proximity while we are following social distancing outside. There's a forced physical proximity inside houses today that is actually leading to sexual abuse. And if you look at the rural areas, and if you actually look at marginalized communities, I think teen pregnancies and unwanted pregnancies are going to rise once the lockdown is being lifted. It's just that it's not reported right now. And I think abortion is a right, and we should actually provide that as a medical service that people can access right now, or even when the lockdown is lifted, as part of a health hygiene to especially women. I know a lot of transgenders who are waiting to do some of their facial treatments, some of their reassignment surgeries, some of the basic things that they really need to go through. I think that also needs to be part of medical services. The last request that I have is, I think there is a lot of community driven activities in the areas of the communities that we are talking about right now, especially women and transgender. And I think without those support systems alive today, I don't think most of us will actually have a coping mechanism. So for all the people who are listening right now, if you know communities, I'm sure you're working for some organization, I'm sure you're part of some housing society, I know you're part of some kind of community. All of us have a family WhatsApp group, and I don't think we utilize it really well. I think encouraging people to support women in informal sectors, helping, sending the number of the domestic like a hotline number for domestic violence. If you are a parent and you have healthcare workers in your own community, if you know a healthcare worker is your neighbor, actually helping them out with a sense of respect by not just clapping their hands, but actually checking in their house that if everything's okay, if things are actually happening, calling up your teachers, because predominantly teachers have been women in my life and for most of our lives, checking on them. We had the opportunity to check on our principal, to check on our alma mater, to check on our teachers, check on your blue collar domestic maid, pay the salary, put that money in and pay the salary. What you do for Diwali, what you do for Pongal, consider that you're actually doing it right now, and help her get the pass, help her get whatever she needs to do. Focus on a lot of dropouts, find out what marginalized communities children are doing. There's a large tendency for girls to be dropouts at this particular point in time. And if you know somebody like Neelam who's working with a marginalized community, I think we deserve to do a call with her and say, how can I support you? How can I hire more transgenders into my system? I know I'm going to be losing a lot of stuff. I know as an organization, I might actually be letting certain people go. How can I ensure that before I let someone go, and especially if it's a woman, do a call and understand if she's the primary breadwinner of the family, can I actually put a biased system in place? Because gender parity should be driven. It's a sad story, but honestly, it needs to be driven. Can we actually prioritize that? Those are going to be a couple of actionables from my end.
Rateesh, that's a lot of action, but what I love hearing from you is the fact that you're essentially saying that the situation is such that we don't need to wait for Diwali now. Whatever you would have done, all the giving that you would have done needs to be done now.
Yeah.
It starts from your home, where you start by asking your mother and your sister and your wife, how are they coping, instead of just, taking the gender roles for granted and saying, okay, this is the way it is, and let things continue.
Absolutely.
And your life, as you have so far. And that's a very, very interesting approach. And I wish more men would be sensitized to that. I will now move on to Neelam, and I would like Anuradha to come in at the end to give, the admin perspective. Neelam, what are the kind of suggestions that you would have to tide over this phase?
Sure, Smita. So one of the first things, and it's highly unknown, and it's a very, very big problem for trans women who are on the grassroots level, who are at the grassroots at this point, is that they're all bound by this Jamaat system known as a Guru and a Chela system. And what is happening right now is that often, before the COVID situation, the Chelas would go out every day, earn that money, keep a minimal sum to themselves, and a huge amount of it was often given to the Guru. And that's how life went by, and that's how they were given that protection, that's how they were taken care of. Now, with that block of income, there is the domestic violence and the abuse that we're talking about is not just prevalent in our homes, the homes of the people who are probably online, but it's highly, highly prevalent in the lives of transgender people. But the sad story is, even when anyone calls and sort of reports that, these things are really not even taken in as any form of abuse or violence. And it's also difficult for a Chela to even make that sort of a call, inform, complain, or drive anything around it. So that, and this situation is definitely going to last for some more time. So I think this is more of an appeal to the government itself, is can there be some sort of a mechanism put in place to actually keep a tab on this abuse? Can there be a helpline offered? Can there be means? And I know that, from the central government and the state governments, there was some bit of money that was put into accounts of people. There is constant ration being given. But there is a state of abuse, and it's not every Guru Chela that there is this problem with, but it's happening a lot, and it's a huge number of people that we're talking about. And that is also leading to suicidal thoughts, and it may just result in that. So I think there is a very big focus that is needed over here. And also, if there is a way that we can encourage the community in other forms of livelihood at this point, like Rateesh just said, that while most of us are laying off, there is an opportunity to start up new businesses, to think about new innovations in this space. If you're someone who has already been running a clothing unit, a tailoring unit, it's a good time to create masks, to make masks. And can we employ people from these marginalized communities? Because it doesn't just create livelihood, but it saves them from a lot of violence and abuse, which will happen if they don't bring in that money. So that's something that is very difficult to be known as well. So I think there's a lot of focus that is needed to understand the abuse, the violence that happens within the homes of the trans communities, and also how can that be countered through other opportunities at this point. And I think secondly, we really need at this point people who can get on the ground and work sort of in collaboration with the government, not specifically, creating own initiatives, but I know that the government at this point has also hired a couple of, when I say government, I mean the local corporation authorities has hired a bunch of trans people to go around, take a survey on how every family in particular area is doing, note down their medical history, and monitor a lot of things. So similarly, there is a huge possibility of the public, of not-for-profit, of social services organizations to get involved and actually conduct these medical surveys, and actually conduct these medical checkups also, basic medical checkups that will just probably check your temperature, and that will probably just check if your oxygen levels are fine. And that can be run by anybody, even without having any sort of a medical background. So these things can be done, which will in fact support those people who may be on the high risk side, support communities who are more prevalent to, and people who are probably more prevalent to these diseases as well. So I think supporting the larger society and the government in running these surveys, running these medical initiatives will go a long way. I know a lot of organizations are distributing ration at this point, but I think it's time that we sort of understand, okay, how much of ration should go out and how much can we start engaging in a new form of service, and maybe a little bit of time spent on doing these medical surveys. And so that's my second thought. And my third thought is, and it's definitely reaching out to Rateesh from SPI, because I know for a fact that for people who have ideas and crazy ideas, and people who want to make a change, who want to make a difference, sometimes need to know how to put that thought into structure, sometimes need to be connected with the right people and get that going, have that in action. So for people on the call, if you're one among those people who really want to implement things, bring that difference, especially in the lives of women, transgender communities, and various other communities that are deeply impacted, I think you must reach out to organizations like SPI Edge that nurture those thoughts and also guide you on how you can implement and be a part of that change. So I think that's about it from me.
Thanks, Neelam. So what you're saying is actually very interesting. What I have understood is, for the trans community, their social systems are very fragile in any case, and they have to depend on the gurus for a lot of things. And that system is now in turmoil. And one of the consequences, apart from lack of livelihood, is that they're also facing enormous abuse, and they have no recourse to any legal redressal. Secondly, you have what you've appealed for is employment for this section, and very helpfully you've also listed out specific things that they can be employed in right now, and hopefully people like Rateesh and our listeners today can take this conversation forward. To wrap this up, I would like to bring in Anuradha, who is in the administration. She knows the legal aspects. She's worked in the field. Anuradha, having heard our other three panelists, I'm sure they've echoed what you already know. What would you say is the way forward for women and trans communities? And I'm saying it separately because they're two different issues, as you listed out at your opening remarks.
So I am very grateful for every input that has come. Gautamiji's perspective was very fresh, and Neelam came from an experienced background and a very unique perspective of a young man from Rateeshji. So it's been a learning experience for me also. I'm so happy that Neelamji feels that the government has been doing a lot, probably their corporation. And in fact, those ideas, I think I'm going to tell people here to copy, because that has not been happening in many other places. And I was reading some reports on the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, correspondence, and only 4,500 people have been given 1,500 rupees each. And according to that's about transgenders. And according to the 2011, this is from the larger corpus, which comes from the center and state governments. And we have, according to the 2011 census, we have 4,88,000 people who identified themselves as transgenders. So out of that, 4,500 people have got. The other things which are coming constantly to us are the people being driven out of their rented accommodation. And yes, we know, we are very much aware about the Guru-Chela relationship. It's also a similar power relationship to a husband and wife relationship in what you call the mainstream society. So the Guru-Chela relationship and the internecine problems within their community has bred a lot of violence always. And almost every, especially for the Hijra community, all the murders are committed, or all the physical violence is committed within the community. Third person, I mean, at least that is my experience in 30 years of service. I haven't seen one single incident when a man or a woman went and murdered Hijra in Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. These are the two states that I know of, or in Bihar, which I belong to. So, so this picture is not as rosy as we would like to think. What we need to ensure, and governments need to do this, and I will take the idea which Neelam ji just talked about appointing a transgender person to enlist others and ensure that everybody is reached. So that I think we shall take this idea up. Thank you so much. But what everybody needs to do is, number one, ensure that they are not thrown out of their houses, that just like many people working in various sectors have been allowed to stay in their rented accommodations, the government of India has actually given this instruction that nobody should be harassed for rent in these times when people are not working, they're not earning. And these are people who are mostly reliant, as you know, on beggary and sex work. And in this double whammy of the COVID virus and social distancing, disease and distance, what are they going to do? So at least they should not be harassed for rent. They should not be pushed out of their accommodations, which are in any case in not the best places. And I'm not please talking about middle class or upper middle class people who identify themselves as another gender. I'm talking of actually marginalized poor people who actually do not have anywhere to go except for their own little jamaats, and they are reliant on their gurus who have a stranglehold on them because their biological families have thrown them away. So they are in dire straits, and they need these interventions. So the short-term interventions are immediately that ensuring medical aid to them, not pushing them away from hospitals and aids. Secondly, letting them keep their accommodation and guaranteeing all of them some financial aid. Now there has been, I was also given a copy of this. I was talking to my welfare department and they gave me a copy signed by 2,000 transgenders from across India, mostly from South India actually, who have given it to the ministry that they should be given at least 3,000 rupees per month for this time, so to cope, and also rations. And hopefully something is being done about it, and we should hear something coming out of this. So there are these issues. The long-term goals, of course, I talked about earlier also, that we have to see. Now, about women, the most important thing about women is, and of course Rateesh, she talked a lot about the long-term things, which, you know, recognition of women as part of the power structure, as decision makers, and people who participate in the, what you call the economy. I'm sorry, I'm not an economy person. I believe that human beings live in a society, they do not live in an economy. The whole problem that the world is facing due to this pandemic is because we are living in an economy. If we were living in a society, we would have answered much better to all these challenges. And that is why I want to remind you of 1918, when the Spanish flu came. You know what it did, how it changed the world? It changed the world in many different ways. Mahatma Gandhi also caught it. Lyndon Johnson also caught it. Mahatma Gandhi was saved by, by some really good Ayurvedic medicines. There were 2 or 3 things which they did. One important thing which happened across India was that the government of India, the British India, just left the people of India to die. And you know what happened was that the freedom people in the freedom struggle, they took up the cudgels. They went from village to village. They took traditional Indian medicines to the people. They looked after the people. And you can see the freedom struggle before 1918 and after 1918. It just changed the color of the country. Because before 1918, people would not come out in droves, women and children, and go and collect at Jallianwala Bagh to be shot dead by the British. So this was a huge change. It was the society which stood up. The whole world looked at India, where Indians actually coped as Indians. They did not look at the British government. We also paid a very big price then, women I mean, because in the whole world, young men died more than women did, in this coronavirus. That was also a coronavirus, by the way. So, but in India, more women died because we were more malnourished. We were less cared for. And we were not only less cared for, but we were caring for them, for all the sick. So therefore, not only because of this, but because later on gastroenteritis, until about from 1918 to about 22, till 22, we had a spate of bubonic plagues and gastroenteritis and cholera epidemics. And we need to look at the history of disease. And that is why when I get a chance, I always tell people, look at this as a history of disease. Learn from, when we read history of wars. We read history of commerce, because it is what is it? It is an androcentric history. It is not a women-centric history. Men want to look at history through wars. They want to look at history through commerce. If we look at history, we must look at history through society, through disease, through challenges for food, through challenges for shelter. And women need to start looking at history from their eyes. And then they will understand how to handle this time. This is not a war, please. This is not a war. This is a health challenge which cannot be met with economics. It has to be met with society, and government is part of society. And the society has to remind the government. The society has to inform the establishment that, hey, this is a democracy. India is a republic. You are for the people, by the people, and you've got to work for it. And you have to and you have seen how the police, and Tamil Nadu especially, police has been doing a lot of good work because people have pushed them to it. Mind you, it's not that we have suddenly become angels, because the situation has become such that in this society, if the police does not become pro-people, then it goes. Because people can't tolerate more than that. So you have to create a situation, a society, a culture which does not take charge of itself will be controlled by someone else. So you have to take charge. So what I want to say is that for women, the solution, there are lots of solutions. You have got, every state has what, like Madhya Pradesh has dial 100, Goa has 112. Every state has these, speed dial, quick response teams which come to you. Use them. Also, build a little community around you. Please don't be alone. Please share what you're going through. It is very important. Somebody will come for help, and the police will respond. This is my guarantee about women, because the law in this country is one of the fairest in the world. It puts as far as women are concerned, and that doesn't mean for everybody. I'm talking about women. For women, the law is very fair in letter. Whether it is fair in deed, that I do not say. But in letter, the law is very fair, because the onus of proof is on the perpetrator, on men, or whoever is abusing the woman. So you need to use that law. The problem is there's lack of knowledge of law, and there's lack of initiative of using law. So we need to, between the government and the civil society, we need to form a combination where we can, make women understand, empower them, and make them use these tools that they have in their hands. And these are both short-term and long-term solutions. And yeah, so I feel that that's enough. And if there are any questions, I can.
Thanks, Anuradha. I mean, this panel has been so fabulous that we've actually run out of time. The organizers said 1 hour. We could go over a little. And I think we will go over a little because I think it's unfair to not have at least 2 questions from the audience. Just to sum up what Anuradha said, the thing that struck out in my mind is not only do we need housing, financial and medical aid for the trans community, they are also facing housing issues. You hear about this all the time about how landlords are kicking people out. But I assume that for the trans community, that problem is compounded, and that's something we need to be sensitized about. And also, I like what you're saying, that somewhere what I hear you saying, Anuradha, is that we expect the government to do everything, whereas this challenge is a partnership. We too are equal stakeholders, and we have to shape up, and we have to demand the change that we want, and we have to be a part of that. I'm going to read out one of the questions first, and the participants at the panel can decide who wants to answer it. So Srini asks, will the challenges faced or to be faced by women in urban and rural areas, are they different? Who would like to take that one? Rateesh, would you have a go at that? We can't hear you. Could we unmute Rateesh, please?
He's unmuted.
Yeah.
Is this better?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, perfect. I have 3 caveats for that answer. One is, as a gender, I think predominantly the problems that they face in both urban areas and rural areas might actually be very common, because at the end of the day, all of us have a roof. We're living in a structure called family, and we are bound by certain norms of the society, which is both stereotypical and perceived as well. There are some problems that is very, very deeply rooted, and its genesis is from the rural side, and there are certain problems that its genesis is from the urban side. So the third caveat is, we are less informed of what usually happens in the rural side, and we are usually more informed thanks to our ability to gain information, and the choices that we make to gain information for about what's happening in urban. So what it leads to is, it leads to a perception that the problems that urban women face and rural women face are actually polar aparts, which is not true. So the answer to the gentleman is, we've discussed some common threads with respect to gender violence, and I think that's common to both urban and rural. We've discussed something that is very pertinent, which is health, the ability for someone to even have reproductive health and just general health for that matter, and that's common to both urban and rural. But I think at a rural level, the facilities and their ability to reach out to primary healthcare centers today is slightly easier, but I think given the lockdown situation, it's just all the more difficult. In urban areas, I know for a fact that it is easier for us to reach out to a hospital and actually even test ourselves for COVID for that matter. Like how Neelam said, the transgender community, it's very difficult for them to even, go and be tested in the first place. The last thing is, I think we should spend some time giving people information on where can they read more about the rural plight. And there are fantastic Instagram channels as well as communities that is doing work. And I think social media has become a fantastic forum where communities that do work with a lot of rural people are writing things out there for people to comprehend and understand, which is what I think Anuradha ma'am was actually talking about with respect to the information of the law. There are a lot of people who are talking about it, And I think it is important for us to follow the right set of people for us to know the distinction between the two.
Okay, that's very good to know, Rateesh. I have a request for you. Could you tell the organizers a list of these, sites which people could follow at the end of the session? Yeah, it'll be
Sure.
We have time for one last question, and I think perhaps Anuradha would be appropriate to answer this. So Dhanush asks, how far are we from getting a legislative representation for the marginalized communities? Is there any movement going on for this purpose? Should I repeat it? Hi, Anuradha, I can't hear you. Could we unmute?
Yeah.
Did you get my question, Anuradha?
Yes, I did. And so you see, this marginalized communities, this phrase is a portmanteau phrase. There's lots of marginalized communities in our country. For today's discussion, I would like to talk about the transgender community as the marginalized community. Women, although they are marginalized, they are 49%. Thanks to Haryana, we are not 50%, but we are 49%. But the transgender community got a law for themselves in 2014. I do not know whether Neelam would know about this law. And the name of the law, I want to tell you the right name of the law is, it's the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act. So but what has happened is that it is a little bureaucratic. The process of identification and, it's very bureaucratic, and that needs to be a little, rationalized. So I feel that, just a minute, there's some message from you on this screen. So I feel that the rationalization and simplification of processes under that law has to be done, because there is so much bureaucracies in that many of them, because many of the transgender community in places like, say, Bhopal or say Madurai, or which are not capital cities, they are not economically very well to do, and they are in a very different kind of system, oppressive system. So for them to keep going to government offices and running around tables and getting this done is a little difficult. So the law is there, but the rules need simplification. And as I told you, that there is this representation to the government now by a whole group of transgenders that is under consideration. And I personally feel that government is giving enough attention to it, and because of other business, it has not come very quickly. But I am very hopeful that in some very soon we should have some simplification of the law that is already there, and which guarantees a few more rights to this marginalized community. The most important right which needs to be given, because our country has got positive discrimination since the constitution came in effect for certain caste groups and communities, we also need to do some positive discrimination for this community. Because otherwise in our country, because of the large population, people do get left behind if they are smaller in numbers. So even for women in various places, we have had positive discrimination, like reservation in jobs, reservation in schools. So that has given them a head start. So this head start needs to be given, and I think that's also under consideration under the government of India.
Okay. Thank you, Anuradha. Thank you to all our panelists. It's been such a amazing discussion, and we've gone over time consequently. To sum up, I think there is enough awareness. Talking to the panel, hearing from them, we know there is awareness, we know there are issues of violence, we know there is issues of lack of resources, and so many other things that we've talked about. But there is also greater sensitization now. And from Anuradha, it's also good to know that in terms of the legal framework, there is movement forward. What perhaps we need now to do is consistently highlight these issues and make sure that the pressure is always there to make sure that this movement progresses further. We have now literally run out of time, so I hand it over to Sudarshan for the final wrap. It's been fabulous talking to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. It was truly educative. I think at an opportune time, once we are out of this lockdown, I think we should invite all of you for a in-person physical workshop on this itself, where we train young minds, especially on these aspects. Thank you so much, Anu ma'am. She's always been kind enough to spare her time. Gautami ma'am, despite your schedule, I know it's a Sunday, but still you're hard pressed for time. Uh, uh, Rateesh and Neelam, Next Gen Views, thank you so much. We take these, and we have a lot of viewers on Facebook who will be obviously seeing it not just now, but whenever they have doubts, they come back to this discussion. And we also, on our part, we'll do our bit in circulating this to a lot of youngsters, especially. Thank you so much to Smita, who ably led this estimable panel. And thanks to all our viewers on Facebook and here as well. We hope now, since the lockdown is extended to May 31st, we hope to come up with another educative initiative next Sunday. Till then, stay safe, take care. Thank you very much. Vanakkam.